as the player, and you play an avatar, a character. Okay, now there's a couple of logical things here to think about. One is that from the avatar's point of view, from the character that you're playing, okay, the computer could not be inside that avatar's reality, right? The avatar's reality is the virtual reality. And the computer that computes that virtual reality has to be outside of the computed reality. Well, that's trivial logic. A computer, a reality can't program itself or compute itself. It has to be done elsewhere. As Dr. Edward Fredkin said, it has to be done in someplace other than inside the virtual reality. The second thing is that the player, okay, who's playing the game. Now, the player is the avatar's consciousness. The player makes all the decisions for the avatar. So if it's a Sims character, that Sims character doesn't do anything unless the player indicates what it is he's supposed to do. So the player that's logged on, sitting at the computer, makes all the choices for the avatar. That's the job of the avatar's consciousness. So the player is the avatar's consciousness. And we know that the consciousness computes, or let me put it this way, we know that the consciousness has to talk to the computer. It's the consciousness, the player, that sends the computer information. Make my elf, stand up. So that player sends that message by probably his mouse or his joystick up to the computer. The computer takes that and then sends data back to the player's monitor showing that the elf has just stood up and the consequences of him doing that. So if he was in a room with a very low ceiling, he might bump his head. So that's the way it works. The consciousness player sends data to the computer sends data back to the player. That's all that's really going on there. The actual virtual reality is just ones and zeros in a computer, on a hard drive someplace. It's not real at all. So if our reality works just like that, and that's the nature of all virtual realities, then we know that the computer that's computing this has to be someplace other than here, and we know that the consciousness that is playing our body, this character, has to be someplace else other than here, and has to be in the same reality as the computer, because the consciousness and the computer talk to each other. They're sending data back and forth. They need to be in the same reality frame. So that gives us an idea of our reality and our consciousness, who we are. We are not our body. We are consciousness. We are individuated units of consciousness, and this body is a computed avatar in a virtual reality. Now that's a big step to take, but that is what the physics experiments are telling us. Now they don't go that much detail, but they tell us that this cannot be a material reality, that it must be based on information, and that it is a virtual reality. But from there, that's where physics leaves us, but from there are just certain logical, things about virtual reality, and that's what I'm explaining. So what it's saying is that our body is the avatar, our consciousness is the player, and the computer and the player are in the same reality frame that I call the larger consciousness system. Same frame that contains those databases that we talked about earlier, the Akashic records. Same space that is kind of the source, if you will, of our universe and other universes as well, it turns out. So that's kind of a quick look at what this reality is, and then we look at ourselves and say, well, what are we doing here? Why have this virtual reality? Why is this virtual reality computed? Where does it come from? What's its purpose? And what's our purpose to be here playing it? And it turns out that if you have, as I talk about where does it all start and where does it come from, it gets to a point that you just have one monolithic consciousness, and that monolithic consciousness has one free will, because consciousness and free will are a match set. You can only have consciousness if you have free will. Consciousness makes choices. There's no free will, there's no choices. So there's no consciousness. So this one consciousness needed to grow up, needed to evolve. And the reason that is so is that consciousness itself is an information system. Okay, so this larger consciousness system is a digital information system. It's non-physical from our point of view here. Just as the player, you playing The Sims, you are non-physical from the perspective of a Sims character. The Sims avatar lives in a Sims world, and you, the player, are non-physical, and the computer is also non-physical to that player. So this consciousness system would have to be non-physical to us. All right, so we're pieces of this, and the reason we exist is that this larger consciousness system evolves by lowering its entropy. Now, that's a science term that I'll have to explain. Entropy is a measure of disorder. So talking about information, if you have bits, but they're all random, just a field of random bits, you have zero information. Randomness doesn't contain information. If you order some of those bits, even into a very simple pattern, say you just order the bits into up, down, up, down, up, down, how would you predict the next thing? Well, you see the pattern. All the up downs, the last one was a down, so the next one will be an up. You see, patterns contain information. So we have an information system, and if it orders its patterns, it creates information. If it's all random, there is no information. So the system evolves, it grows, it changes, trying to lower its entropy. Entropy being lower means more order, more structure. Okay, entropy being high means more randomness, less information. So it evolves by increasing its information, its order, its functionality. Okay, that's what it has to do. If it doesn't do that, it dissipates and goes away. It just disappears. Well, if you're an information system, that means it dies. So like everything else, it has to evolve just to exist and maintain itself. To do that, it has to lower entropy. And as a monolithic thing, it was limited in just what it could do. There was just this one free will that was making singular choices. So it needed more potential, more ways to grow, more ways to lower entropy. That means more ways to create more order, more structure. And one of the ways it did that, same thing our cells learned to do, because our cells did the same thing in a biological sense, and that is it split itself into pieces so it could interact with those pieces. Now all the pieces have free will, and you have multiple things interacting with each other in free will. Now the possibilities and the potential is hugely greater, because it's hard to say what will come out of all of these independent individual things interacting, as opposed to just one thing interacting with itself. So it did that, and it found itself then in a social system. It and a lot of other things had free will. They were all interacting. And how do you evolve? How do you lower entropy in a social system? You lower entropy in a social system through cooperation, caring, working together. That's the low entropy possibility. You know, as we're now, you know, like evolution does, it tries everything, and the stuff that works persists, and the stuff that doesn't dies. So the system learns that through cooperation, that's there, and you can modify that probability with your intent, because that's just the future probable reality. You can modify those little spikes we saw